Hey, just a heads up that the following content may be disturbing or triggering for some listeners and is not appropriate for children. Please take care of yourself and others who may be listening with you. Welcome to the Bonus Babies Podcast, a show that has no easy answers, only hard questions.
That's the thing about foster kids. You have to get them to calm down. You have to get them to trust because we don't share any DNA. So we have to replace the DNA with trust. And that's so important for foster children, because that trust was broken. It was broken when their mother died. You know what I mean? They trusted her to be there all their lives, right? Or maybe somebody was inappropriate with them. They trusted a family member or a neighbor, and that trust was destroyed. So I have to replace them and say, life gets better, and you know what I mean? And always be here for you. And don't let anybody touch you without your permission. All of these. And what I'm saying is it takes time for them to process it and to finally believe it.
Can you tell me what you call the kids who you've cared for over the years?
We feel that the children that we receive coming into our home are bonuses. So we call them bonus babies.
I love that. This is your host, Jayne Amelia Larson, and I'm a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate volunteer for youth in foster care. Yeah, I know it's a mouthful. In the same way a CASA works, I explore all things in the foster care maze by talking to kids, parents, caregivers, attorneys, social workers, therapists, really anybody and everybody who will speak to me to keep the conversation open and the information flowing about all things CASA.
Hi, this is Jake Eberly, the producer of the Bonus Babies Podcast. And today, Jayne Amelia speaks with Gavin Glynn. So Gavin and his partner started out by adopting a single child, initially to save their partnership. But after his partner left, he ended up fostering a sibling set with the intention of adopting, but the social worker told him that the kids would lose their benefits if they were adopted, which was actually inaccurate. He quit his job in entertainment and got a job as a teacher so he could be there for the kids. And now he's got them all through college. It's an incredible story, but we'll let him tell it. Here's Gavin Glynn.
Hey, I'm here with Gavin Glynn. You have such a good name, Gavin. It's alliterative, right? Is that the correct term? Yeah.
Right. G&G.
Yeah, G&G.
I'm actually named after a nun.
Oh, really? Wow, that's interesting.
Yes. I'm named after Sister Gavin Ignatius.
Oh, how wonderful. So is your family of origin Catholic?
Very. Southside Chicago. My mother's from Ireland and my father's parents are from Ireland.
Oh, my goodness.
And my father was working a job, construction job in Cincinnati. And he was drunk and he passed out in the alley and a nun found him. And her name is Sister Gavin Ignatius. And shortly, a year later, I was born. And so they named me I'm named after a nun. So, and she's actually the co-founder of AA. She was a silent partner because she was a nun. She couldn't take credit with Bill W. So,
oh my goodness,
very.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I like to tell that little story from time to time. I go, oh yeah.
That is a nice little anecdote. That's.
Yeah.
All right. So you're here in Los Angeles, right? So can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you're doing?
Yeah. Well, I'm still trying to figure that out, but I'm Gavin. I'm 62. I work in the educational field during the day. I work in the entertainment industry at night. I was in the entertainment industry for 30 years. And then I decided to adopt 5 kids. And I had been with a nonprofit agency. And the way nonprofit works differently from DCFS is that nonprofit, you have to have 2 parents. And they came to me and they said, you can't stay home. You need to go get a job. I said, well, how am I going to watch the kids? They're like, you figure that out. So I just grabbed out of my ear. I just said, what if I teach? I'll keep the same schedule as my children and then I could pick them up after school. And they said, great. So that's how I ended up becoming a teacher to save my children. And so here I am. So it's interesting to be in both worlds and to have this incredible world in entertainment industry where there's a lot of money and things happen very quickly, and then to go into foster care and everything moves at a snail's pace.
Yes, it's very very convoluted and there's a lot of gaps, and everything does take a really long time. And of course, for the kids, it seems as if it just goes on and on and on and on, right?
Well, and for me, honestly, my kids have done very well. My youngest is graduating from college October 7th.
Bravo.
I've had 5 kids all done with college, and that was always a goal. That was something I always had for them. And there was, people would say, "Oh, how did you get all 5 to go to college?" And I go, "This isn't going to sound politically correct, but they didn't have any choice."
They were going. That was it.
Right. And honestly, I worked it in. They're like, "Pa, where's my shoes?" "In college." "Pa, can I smoke weed?" "In college."
You're funny. Okay, so tell me how you first fostered, because your first experience was a foster to adopt, but
Right.
tell me how that started.
Right. There was foster to adopt here, and then there's foster to foster. And we did foster to adopt. Our friends had moved into the West Adams area, one of those beautiful historic homes. And we had,
Yeah, they're beautiful there.
and we have visited them. And then, on a very personal note, we were at like 15 years, my partner and I, and we were having trouble, like all couples. And so we went to couples therapy. And in this couples therapy, it came up for my partner that he wanted a house and fill it up with children. And I was 38, and I was like, wow, okay. And I had just become the head of Walt Disney International for entertainment in Tokyo. I was like, whoa. And so, really, the first year that we bought the house, I traveled back and forth between Tokyo and Burbank.
And he was the main caregiver?
No, the kid didn't come in. That's when we made the decision. And then when he
Oh, I
finally
see. Okay.
came, the laws and the rules were so different then than they are now. Because I've had my kids 2001, 22 years. And it was a very different time. George Bush Jr. just became president. All the liberals went in hiding. It was, shh, don't tell him you're gay. You won't be able to adopt. And I was like, are you kidding me? You told the wrong person to shut up. I was like, I'm loud, I'm proud. And I go, no, no concessions. And so my agency told me, be quiet, don't, LA Times interviewed me. And they're like, can you keep that down? I'm like, no. I mean, you're Jewish. Can you keep that down? No, I wouldn't expect you to. So why should I? And so that's how it went. And then we got the first one. And my partner and I was actually had just accepted a job to transfer from Tokyo to Paris, Walt Disney. And the laws then were you could not take a foster child out of the country, much less the state. So I had a predicament. We had to decide, do I take Ibn Yahya, this child that they called about, or do I go to Paris? And obviously I made the right choice. And so we did just what heterosexual couples do when they're having troubles in their marriage. We thought, oh, let's have a kid to save the marriage. Well, that's a horrible reason to have, a child. And I've discussed this with my children. And it was interesting because the only requirement I said to my partner was, no matter who we get, no matter who's brought into our life, we will not throw them back into foster care. And I had no education on foster care. I knew nothing about it, but I just knew myself. And I just said, what happens? And I know this is a trepidatious for people who are thinking about coming. They're like, oh, but what if it doesn't work out? I could never turn them back in, right? So I just told my partner that. And 9 months into it, my partner had early childhood issues. Our son had early childhood issues. It was not a good match. And he just says, I got to go. So he left. It was me. I said, you take the outside. I'll take the inside of the house. And then not too.
Wow, so you separated then. You
Yeah.
separated.
Yeah.
And how old was the child then?
7.
Ah.
So, but when you take foster care classes, oh my God, there's so many classes, you have to keep your foster care license up. Now, my foster care license was proxy. When you go through a nonprofit, there's 75 nonprofit children's agency in LA County. When you go through a nonprofit, you get a proxy, your license through a proxy through the nonprofit. When you go directly through DCFS, then you get a community care license through the state of California. Well, I had a proxy license. So I had to do everything that the agency told me to do. And I found out later, actually, the LA Times writer, Robert Poole, wonderful writer, he told me, you know why they're doing that? I said, no. He said, because you're gay. He says, they're checking on you, they're targeting you because in case somebody says something, because usually home care visits are every 3 to 4 weeks. I had one every single week. And I had to notate. I didn't know any different. I just did everything they told me to do. But I was also targeted because I was gay, that, they wanted to be able to say they covered themselves. They're visiting the house every week. Nothing wrong is happening. And as a result, I became part of an advocacy group because these 75 agencies were placing the most difficult children with gay couples because they knew how badly they wanted to become parents. And so,
Wow.
yeah. So we had an advocacy group. We challenged the state of California, and we won, and we proved it. Right? You're like, oh, you want to be a kid? Okay, take this. Right? And my youngest son, an exposed baby, if you know what that means. I
Yes,
don't
but
want.
could you explain that for us, for the listeners?
Uh, yeah, the mother was high on crack cocaine when she was giving birth, and this exposes the baby to it. The essence of it is that when the mother goes to smoke cocaine, she feels very anxious beforehand. The fetus feels this anxiety. And after the first time they smoke cocaine or use cocaine, it burns the entire fetus. And so the fetus now knows when mom gets anxious, oh no, and they curl up in a ball and they say, here comes the cocaine, right? And so as a result, crack baby, as a result, when the child is born, it doesn't like to be touched. It doesn't like to be held. Usually you sit them on their stomach and pat, but that's about it. And they're very, very detached. And because they're afraid, because whenever they sense any kind of intense emotion, they know pain comes next. So you have a kid in foster care. Mine was actually a rescue because he had already been in foster care at another place. But UCLA, it's called UCLA Ties, and they do it. As soon as you find out that an adoption is being disrupted, UCLA Tie goes in and does everything they can to save it, and they couldn't save it. And they turned over his case to Christine Devine at Fox 11 News, and he was spotlighted in Wednesday Child. We got him, and having no experience in this, I only had what my parents, how they raised me. I was raised in a very close-knit Irish Catholic family. All of my cousins, we lived within blocks of each other, extended family, the whole European first-generation immigrant experience. And now I'm in LA, and I have a kid who's been exposed to crack cocaine. I'm in the complete opposite of Irish Catholic family, foster care. So it was a huge learning curve for me.
And how did it work then when your partner left? You're on your own. At that time, you only have one child. What happened next?
Well, I remember saying goodbye to him. He had took his last stuff, and January 12th. And my son and I were watching TV, what was left. My partner didn't take the TV. And I remember this really cold shiver going down my spine. And I thought, oh my God, how did I get here? What's going to happen to us? And then shortly thereafter, I got an email from a group called Pop Luck. And it's open now, both gay and lesbian, but it was primarily gay fathers. And they said there were 4 kids. What happened was the president of Pop Luck's sister was a child therapist. Her office partner was the school therapist at Fairfax High School. The Fairfax counselor called the therapist and said, we're looking for a family for these 4 kids. And it was specific because the kids were being put into foster care. Their mother had died of a heart attack. 2 were going in one home, 2 were going in another. 2 were going in a girl's home, 2 were going to a boys' home. And the effort was to stay together. And
the school was making that effort. Wow.
Yes. Well, and it's fascinating. The president of the PTA, Heather Evans, an amazing woman and jazz singer, her brother is with the West Adams Heritage Association in Mid-City. So there was a huge connection there. She contacted me initially and said, I'm trying to find these 4 kids a bigger apartment. They're with somebody. They're with one of the friends of the kids, and they're all cramped up in this apartment on Hayworth behind Cantor's. And I said I would help them, find a bigger place. So I took my son with me. We went over and visited them. It was cramped. I mean, cramped. All the shades were pulled. You don't want to go too much. You don't want to be liable. But I looked around the room and I saw state-of-the-art computers. And I was like, okay, something's going on here because there's not a high light quality here, but there's expensive equipment. I said, something's going on here, right? It's surely something. So I went home after meeting the kids and I told my foster care agency, I said, those kids need to come out of there. That's what I said, Jayne. And
Wow.
so 10 o'clock that night, I get a knock on the door, social worker. It said, you ordered 4 kids? I go, what?
You ordered 4 kids?
Right.
Like a pizza.
Right.
Wow. Okay.
I was like, well, you're past 30 minutes, so I guess no. I was like, no. I said, I'm so sorry. Come inside. And I go in the back to my office and I call my foster agency, the emergency number, of course. And I said, hey, these 4 kids showed up. Yeah, you said you wanted them. I said, no, I didn't. I said, they have to come out of there. And she goes, oh, I assumed that meant you wanted them. I said, Sylvia, my house is only authorized for 1 child. My fax machine goes off. Your house has been authorized for 6 children. I was like, what the hell? So my friend was there. We just got back from dinner. And my friend was there. And he goes, let me just shorthand this for you. You're going to take the kid. La, la, la. Just roll with it. And
Okay, so he gave it to you and he said, I see the writing on the wall, Dad. This is what's going to happen.
yeah, this is so, we got, and it was so sad, just what you think, 4 kids in plastic, hefty garbage bags with their belongings. You're like, oh my God. And they came in and 2 boys, 15, they were twins, fraternal, and 2 girls, 11 and 12. And they're all the same, but they had a Irish Catholic mother and a Korean father. And the Korean father was he was incarcerated for gambling, and the mother had passed away, had a heart attack at a very young age. Interesting, the same age as my mother when my mother died in a car accident, and the 15-year-old the same age I was. So all of it spoke to me. I remember this, and inside my head I was thinking, whoosh, I wish somebody could come and could have told me the path to go. And so that really spoke to me in that sense. And the oldest daughter, Emily, said, are you going to adopt us? Right off the bat, I was like, whoa. I said, you know what? And I remember the scene at the end of the movie Working Girl between Sigourney Weaver and Melanie Griffith, or actually between Melanie Griffith and her new secretary. And she goes, you know what? Let's have a cup of coffee and let's just take it from there. We'll see how things go. And that's all I could think of. And I said, you know what? Let's just take it day by day and we'll see how it goes. You have to have a decision in this too, because in the end, you do not adopt children. Children adopt you, And even, right, and even in the biological sense, if a biological child...
That's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah.
In the Buddhist phrase is, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And the same thing, when the child is ready, the parent will appear. And I see this with my friends who have biological children. If these biological children do not recognize the adults in their home as their parents, you're going to have problems. And so I share this because it's so easy to pull that lever, the trap door, and say, oh, these kids are acting up because they're foster children. And that's just BS. Children are children. It's the times that we're living in. Children are pre-exposed to certainly more information than I was, and I was a first-generation immigrant. I knew a lot more than my parents. And now this generation, they have the phone, they have the TV, they have TikTok. They're exposed to so much more information that they don't have to listen to their parents. They don't have to listen to their teachers because they have a phone. The intel that they need is all in their hand. They just need to pick it up. And it works a lot faster than parenting and teaching. So we're competing for authority.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So let me ask you, how did you end up adopting those kids? What happened to that four set?
Yes. Well, we're in the clear, so I can talk about this now. In essence, what happened was a social worker came to my oldest four, and the oldest four were the youngest twin. He was on board that night. He said, "Which one's my room?" Great, cool. And he was been on board ever since. And but the girls were having a tough time, adapting initially. And so what happened was, the thing is, foster children have a lawyer, and everybody goes, "Oh, they don't really, no, 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 no. You're trying to set rules in your house, reasonable rules, right?" And they run it by their lawyer, and then their lawyer calls you and tells you whether it's acceptable or not, right? And one time I remember my
Wow.
youngest daughter called her lawyer and said, "Pa's asked me to do the dishes. I think that's unfair." And she turned around and said, "Well, no, that's not unfair, honey. That's a reasonable request, I mean, and they were so undersupervised all their lives. Their mother went to work at 6, came home at 9 at night. They were so unsupervised, and I used to tease them and say they were feral, and
Mhm.
were so unsupervised that they trusted nobody. And their mother had taught them, you know what, stay together, and they were very close, and they were very loyal to each other. But it was also out of necessity, so that they never got picked up by a social worker. They were never reported by the school for, under supervision. So they were very close knit, and that I appreciate to this day. And so anyhow, the social worker came by, and she didn't like me, and so she told them, "Do not get adopted by him because you'll lose all your financial aid for college." I believed her, and it turns out things have changed since then. But if you're in foster care by the age of 13, on question number 54 on the FAFSA, the college application for financial aid, I said, "Were you ever in foster care?" Now it says, "Were you ever in foster care from 13 and above?" You get all of your public education paid for, your housing, your everything is paid for. And so I was like, "Well, college is the most important thing here." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "We don't need I'm from the 70s where people started living in sin, right? And would saying, we don't need a piece of paper to say that we're married." And I said, "Hey, we don't need a piece of paper to say that I'm your dad, you know, because I want you to get that education." Um, and then recently, I found out later it was a lie, but recently I had open heart surgery, and I had the lawyer, and I had to do my will. And I always said in my head I was leaving the house to my 5 children. And so it was so, first I was like, "Oh, who wants to deal with the will?" And then I went, it was so calming. It was so restful. And my attorney is Grace Yu, who's actually running for city council. But it was so great working with her because she used to be one of those lawyers, the lawyers for kids. She used to be an advocate. And my point was, I got it all out on paper, and I was leaving my house to my kid. So my will became our adoption paper, is what I'm trying to say. It was a metaphor for our adoption.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
a lot of people kick their. I'll never forget social worker when the twins were turning 18, and she goes, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I was like, well, I always get 2 separate cakes, and we'll have their friend. And she goes, "I'm not kidding." And I'm like, I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question. So what are you going to do? Are you kicking them to the curb when they turn 18 because you're not going to get a check? I was like, what? And I'm like, look, I'm only using foster care as a means for a gay man to have children. I am not interested in the foster care game. My children are not in foster care, right? They're my children. So she wrote me up for using the my word. This guy thinks he owns these kids. They're in the foster to a foster program, not foster to adopt. I was like, oh my goodness. God forbid that I tell these kids they have a forever home. And so anyhow, it came back, and and when I went through all this, and I sat down with my kids and I explained the whole, I left the oldest twin, the executor, and I explained, and I have to tell you, there was even a huge growth even between us as a family, even 22 years later. It was like, that's the thing about foster kids. You have to get them to calm down. You have to get them to trust, because we don't share any DNA. So we have to replace the DNA with trust. And that's so important for foster children, because that trust was broken It was broken when their mother died. You know what I mean? They trusted her to be there all their lives, right? Or maybe somebody was inappropriate with them. They trusted a family member or a neighbor, and that trust was destroyed. So I have to replace them and say, life gets better, and you know what I mean, and always be here for you, and don't let anybody touch you without your permission. You know, all of these, I hate to sound like a bumper sticker, but these were things that I had to, and what I'm saying is it takes time for them to process it and to finally believe it. And they go, okay. And we were there, Jayne, we were there, and then my heart situation came up, and I was like, oh my God, I can't imagine abandoning these kids in death right now after everything we went through the last 20 years after their mother died of a heart attack. You know, I was like, life is a circle. So I'm here. Surgery went extremely well, and 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 now my youngest is graduating, and you know, I always kept the door open for his other dad, not because I was interested in you know, the other dad, my ex-partner's well-being. I didn't do that at all. I did it for our son's well-being. He needed to know that two people loved him and wanted him to do well, and I always kept that. You don't have to learn from other people, but I learned, don't ever say anything negative about the other parent. Never, ever say that, because the child can only process, what do you say when I'm not in the room, right?
Right. Right.
So
Hmm.
I never said anything negative at all. And I had a next door neighbor, a Japanese American woman, who wanted to have children. She didn't want children, so she kind of became, but no, she did become an interloper, but she was like a grandmother figure. And oh, every time I would say no, he would run out the back door, jump the fence, and go over to her house, and she would say yes. So, but someone told me, you know what? That's what grandmothers get to do. You know, they need to know that there's one person that will spoil them, and always. You know, so I did. You know, he
Mm.
tried to pit us against each other, and I would just smile. And I said, you know, oh, look what she did. Ooh, she bought me all this shampoo from Costco, and I go, she must love you a lot, you know. And I turn around and be like, you know.
Mm. Right. So, do you feel that you've been successful as a dad? I mean, I'm very curious because it wasn't even your idea to adopt a kid or to
Well, and
foster
I
a
was
kid.
careful about telling the kids there, because they're going to be like, "What?" You know. And I said, "It's interesting in life, is what I want to say, is that yes, especially after my surgery, you know, and they all came running, and they all took turns taking care of me, and I like, this was the best decision I ever made in my life." And a social worker from USC was getting her PhD, and she made me one of her case studies, and she said, "How do you feel about being gay?" And I said, "It's the best thing that ever happened to me." And she had wrote in the book that I made a trajectory statement. And I remember thinking, well, no, I believe that. I really believe it's the best thing that ever happened to me. And especially when I told the Pop Luck group that I was taking in 4 more kids, 5, that night, the next day, that night, from IKEA, truckload came with beds, blankets, microwave. The gay community just stepped up, and I mean, it was so emotional. I was like, oh, it's just my proudest moment of being gay, you know,
Yeah,
it
that's
came
just
through.
super.
Yeah.
Wow, that's just
So, but
fantastic.
anyhow, that
Yeah.
I ended up being the
Yeah.
case study, and I read the whole thing. She's asking questions very similar to yours. So it's making me think about that.
So, I want to ask you, you mentioned also that you recently wrote a 10-minute play.
Oh,
Can you tell me
yes.
about
I
that?
am the new coordinator for the Alliance of Los Angeles Playwrights, and there's about 267 playwrights. And our mission is really, you know, they always say LA has no culture, Broadway doesn't transfer to Los Angeles. And so, you know, we set out to prove them wrong every day. And I was sitting in the dining room, and my son, the youngest, turned to me. He said, you have to write a play about this, about us. And I never wrote anything because I didn't want to do an invasion of their privacy. And he says, Pa, you have so many stories. You really do. You've got to write about, you know. So rather than write about them, I wrote about gay people having children. And it's 4 friends, and they meet for breakfast in Silver Lake, you know, every Sunday. And they ensue. I'm sure there is some influence from Sex and the City here, but there's four friends. Right. And so, but I loved it. And I'm telling you, I wrote it very quickly. It just poured out of me. And I got to say what I wanted to say. There was a lot of things, Jayne, I could not say because I could not rock the boat, the foster agency told me do not say that you're gay. And also nonprofits, they make an extraordinary amount of money. And my nonprofit was sitting on a trust of like $35 million. And this is money that comes from LA County. They just don't spend it on the kid. Could you imagine having $35 million that is rightfully owed to the children and you're sitting on it for a rainy day to make sure that you always are financially solvent? I mean, it was just high crime. I was like, ugh. And so I couldn't say anything at the risk. I did say something one time, and they came and they said they were going to take the four kids away from me. And they interviewed all four of them. And they said, no, he's our dad. We're not going anywhere. Except my youngest daughter said, no, we're not going anywhere. But if something opens up in Beverly Hills, can you let me know? Oh, 13-year-olds. They know they rule the universe. But so I wrote this play, and it's called Suddenly Silver Lake. And it's that because Silver Lake was the only people knew about Silver Lake were the people who lived there. And it's this incredible, people hate the word hipster, but it's incredible hip town. It was the gay community in the 20s and 30s. It's still predominantly gay, but nobody knew about it. Now everybody knows about Silver Lake. And according to Forbes magazine, Silver Lake has tipped San Francisco off the top as the hippest city in the United States. And then all of a sudden, the gentrification that happened at Silver Lake and what was happening where I live in West Adams, there were gay couples in Silver Lake when they decided to have kids, they'd come down the hill, literally, and they'd come to West Adams and buy one of these big historic homes and fill it up with kids. So, more elbow room. So all of a sudden, Silver Lake was on the map. And it just struck me. I said, you know what? I need to take advantage of this opportunity and tell the gay perspective. And the hardest thing out of all of this, and I'm not going to cry, I'm telling myself I'm not going to cry. The hardest thing about this is, I live in a community that's very diverse, Jewish, we have people from Israel, we have people from Morocco, we have Muslims, we have everybody. We have an incredible, extraordinary street. But I even felt it there, and that was, I've always found that heterosexual parents will never, ever ask a gay parent for parenting advice, ever. And I have been, and my kids, we were coming into, there was a generation that had just grown up, and then I was part of the next generation going up. And then there's a generation 4 or 5 years, behind me, and lovely people, but they would never, ever. And so many times I would, tell myself, I said, why don't you ask me? I said, I've been down this road. I would have told you, right? And they're like, well, your kids come from foster care. And I was so taken aback. I was like, what? And the attitude is that your kids are damaged goods. So what kind of advice could you give us? And I was like, wow.
That's just gross. That's gross.
Yeah. I was like, wow, I've been down so many roads, and I've been through the teen taxi mode, where your kids have to be brought everywhere. And I had 5 at once, right? Oh, you need to be at this place. You need to go to this school. I had to navigate the LAUSD magnet nightmare, all of that. And, I just focused on the positive. And I said, you know what? Less than 4% of foster children ever attend one day of college. Less than 1% complete a 4-year degree. All 5 of your children have their college degrees. You're good. You set out a goal. In fact, the other day, my youngest and I were walking the dogs, and we were, let's just say, having discourse. You know what I mean? We were in an agreement about something. And then he stopped cold and looked at me right in the eye. He said, I did what you asked me to do. I completed my college degree. And he just stopped me cold. And I went, you're right. I'm good. Let's keep walking the dogs. Yep. I said, and
that's right. It's not fair to keep on changing the goalpost.
Right.
Right.
And I said, you know what? That has always been it. And for him to say that and share that with me and say, you know what? Of course I want him to finish it for himself. And his other dad for graduation bought him a $6,000 Rolex. And he came in
Wow.
just, yeah, that's
Okay.
what we call in the, what do you call that? Divorced parents, or, we call that the Disney dad. I'm the disciplined dad
Ma-
and he's the Disney dad, right? And I was,
the disciplined dad and the Disney dad.
right.
Oh, I love that. Right.
So he came, and so anyway, he came to my room and he showed me the watch, and I was just floored. And I had an insecure moment. And I said, I can't provide you with that, And he knew it. And he looked into my eyes and he said, this is very, I brought that up twice now. He looked in my eye. Crack babies cannot make eye contact. So my son staring me in the eye, we got over it. We're healed, right? So he looked at me in the eye and he said, you nudged me and nudged me to get where I am today. I can never repay you for that. And I was like, oh, that was better than a six.
Mm.
But he still loves a $6,000 Rolex.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So what's happening in the house now? Is anybody home? Are you on your
Yes,
own? You
yeah.
an empty nester? What's
No,
going
I
on?
was. This is called the boomerang generation. All the kids moved out. My house had an echo to it. And then every single child moved back. Very expensive in LA. All 5 of them. My oldest daughter, and I'm only just sharing this not to expose her privacy, she ran away. She asked me, kids ask you the darndest things when you're in the middle of a household task, right? And I literally had a basket of laundry, and I'm walking up the stairs, and my daughter, 15, says, can I have a boyfriend? And it was right out of the movie, Yours, Mine, and Ours, Henry Fonda's
Yes.
walking up this, and they're asking him questions. He's answering them. And I go, what? And I look at my watch and I go, well, how old are you? 15? No, 16. And I was like, I just bought a year, right? That night she ran away. And I
Mm.
looked for her for 3 months, and I sat and I wept on my front porch for 3 months. And I just thought, she might drive by, and I'd say, everything's forgiven. Don't worry about it, come home. And it never happened. And then I realized it took me 3 months. Perhaps this is not good parenting, but this took me 3 months. I went, wait a minute. Your siblings are not upset. You obviously know where she is. And so we had to have that conversation. So we went back and forth with her coming in and going. And then 2 years later, she came and she brought me my grandson, 2-year-old. And
Ah,
so
wow.
that, and I feel bad that I didn't go through his first 2 years, right? But you know what? I'm from Southside, blue collar, Chicago. And I said, okay, get in the car. Where are we going? He said, you're going to go to the DMV. You're going to learn the test. You need to get a driver's license. Then we're going to take you to LA Community College, because if you're 16 and older, you can finish your high school diploma at any community college. And these are the kind of things my kids really relied on me, And they tease me and they say, Pa, this situation it's not good. Can you write one of your super duper letters? My super duper letter.
Do you think your background as a producer helped you to
Oh,
produce this household?
100%. Thank you, Jayne. Thank you, Jayne. I really appreciate that observation, because that's it. And I kept trying to tell people, my job as a producer is to follow the nickel, right? And if I can't follow the nickel, then I get fired, right? And my job is to guesstimate how much things cost. And, in the movie studio, if I spend too much money, that's unfortunate. If I spend too much money on a film and it doesn't, well, that's just an unfortunate situation, right? But if I don't spend all the money and the film doesn't do well, somebody's stealing the money, right? And so just having
Mhm.
that perspective and just dealing with foster care, Henry Winkler puts on, I don't know if he does it anymore, but he puts on a foster care graduation at the Dolby Theater in Hollywood. And he put that on, and the boys went. And Antoine Fisher from the movie, Antoine Fisher was there, and he was the guest keynote speaker. And we talked afterwards about this very thing, how much money your overhead and a film or a television show is 10%. Your offices, your staff, your computers, your Xerox paper is 10%, right? Your travel is 7%. And figuring out your budget. That's kind of nightmarish head for my children. And I'm always guesstimating, go, no, that's not worth it. No, do this. But anyhow, I had that. And then I looked in the LA Times one day reading. At that time, foster care cost $1.5 billion. This is what Antoine Fisher and I were talking about. $1.5 billion. It costs only $550 million to get the money to the foster children that they need for services, right? To pay the foster parents and, services that they shoes, coats, tuition, tutoring. So I go, what? 550 million to make foster care happen, but $1 billion for the overhead?
Yeah, that's a
And
problem.
that just
That's
tells
a
you
problem.
right there that LA County has no oversight. There's no oversight. And in the Buddhist world, they say people view foster children like drinking from a river where you don't know where it begins. And people naturally, inherently are afraid of foster children. And this is part and parcel also because people will come forward to overcompensate. Say, oh my God, if you need anything, you call me. And I can tell you 90% of those people are not available. You're like, oh, please,
Right.
But the other thing, it's just out of the fear, right? And the nonprofit agencies, their board of directors are non-paid. If you have a non-paid board of directors, they have no access to the financial records, none whatsoever. They're just there for the foster kids for the good, sake of it. And it looks good on their resume, right? But nobody is monitoring the books of these 75 private nonprofit. They're nonprofit
I'm
and, they're sitting on
yeah,
35 million. You're like, hmm.
I'm really glad you're talking about the money because I realized I was talking with my producer that we actually need to have a couple episodes about the money because it is the foster care business, as one kid has called it, who I recorded not long ago. But the reason why I asked you about the producing actually was because I can see you solve problems. You're a troubleshooter. You
Right.
put pieces together. You assemble all the working parts and you make sure they continue working. That's actually what I was thinking,
Well,
which I bet is also true, right?
yes, you're very intuitive. And you know what? I had to sit down and I realized that we were eligible for services if I kept my income low. I worked for Disney and I was a consultant for the Fox network. I was bringing over 225,000 a year. I now have 5 children and I'm making $25,000 a year as a substitute teacher. However, the caveat is that I qualified now for lower utilities, because I got 5 kids, I got to turn the electricity on. I just qualified for, so much more. However, I realize that the equity of my home is going up. So now that the youngest child is graduating from college and we're done, my house is worth $1.5 million. I bought it for $230,000. So in
Woohoo!
my head, I said to myself, I'm working for 25,000 a year, but my pension is this house. And so when we're done, I will have something. And if I wasn't a producer, I would never been able to arrive at that. And
Right, to figure that all out.
right.
That's right.
So
That's right.
follow the nickel.
Yeah, yeah, follow the
Does
nickel.
anybody know what a
So
nickel is? I'm like,
yeah, I don't. It doesn't buy much. So, so why do you think there aren't more foster parents, and why aren't there better foster parents?
well, here's the startling thing. 80% of foster parents were foster children themselves. So
Hmm.
they're aware of the business. And I know people, do a cottage industry, and I know people, they'll put 2 beds. The foster care system is so overworked, and that in this area alone, I live in Council District 10. We have the highest concentration of foster children because of the large homes, right? And the low income areas as well. It's a way to bring in money. They changed the ruling. Once you adopt a child, you still get your check until 18 because people are saying, I can't adopt because I need the money. So when it becomes a financial thing, for me, it's insidious. But I do know people, and I mean this seriously. I know people who have a beautiful home and current year car, and they go to Vegas every other weekend, and you're like, how do you do this? Well, the kids go outside. They can't come home till 9 o'clock at night, and there's padlock and chains in all the cabinets. They come home at 9. They unlock the cabinets, take out your pudding cup, take out cheese and crackers, go to your room, and I don't want to see you till tomorrow morning, right? And when you hear this, and I mean, I know the person, right? You're just unbelievable. And the other thing is that it's getting better. There was nothing. There was nothing for teenagers, and there was nothing for emancipated youth. And we also have no tracking method with LA County. We don't know how successful our kids are. Therefore, we don't know how effective LA County foster care is. We have no idea whether we're doing it. I can tell you based on the crime rate. I mean, if you're a foster child, you're 10 times more likely to end up on drugs, prostitution, jail, dead, or all the above. And the statistics are so alarming. Clearly, it doesn't work, but they're not going to spend any more money on tracking. They don't know how effective they're being or not being. And things have changed. I mean, I'm not being, all vinegar here. Like we used to not have educational rights. We now have educational rights. And just before, when they wrote an individual education plan for a child with special needs, you just sat in the meeting and nodded your head. You had no educational rights. Now we can say, no, my child needs this. No, my child needs that. We can now take our children out of the state. So there are improvements. Every time you ask the county to audit your nonprofit agency, they go and look at the receipts. They never go. This is the hard part. This is the answer to your question I know you're waiting for. Because they don't go back to the kids and say, are you receiving these services? Did you get that coat? Did you get the shoes? Are you getting swimming lessons? Are you getting tutored? They refuse to go back to the children to find out if the receipts are actually vetted or accurate. And that therein lies the rub. And so these nonprofits, they get away with murder. They can do whatever they want because there's no true vetting.
Okay, so I want to ask you something else about values. Is that something you think about, or how were you raised, or how have you lived? Do you think about values and
All the
their role
time,
in your
all
life?
the time. As I shared, I'm a Buddhist, but I don't know if I actually came out and said it, but yes. And my Buddhist organization is, the whole essence of it is value creation between teacher and student, the disciple and mentor. And yes, just very much so. And we have these kind of conversations. And this is where the trust comes in. When you start talking about values and saying, is that, and now my kids, I've got two kids that are, I won't say they're Trumpers, but they're very much in that neighborhood. And, I kind of laughed and said, how did you get out of my house? Where did you get this from? Right. And we don't own our children. But you know what it was? It's because they saw the system. They saw people taking advantage of it. Right. And they see good money going after bad, that they want to stop it. You know what I mean? There is no oversight. So they're like, people are just taking advantage. So they just think, let's stop the system before it goes any further. So that's where they're coming from. But the values of, I'm just thinking, my son joined Silver Lake Presbyterian Church, and I was like, oh, because he was pretty much leaning toward Buddhism. And then he said, I said, I'm just curious. I said, I support, 100% what your decisions are. But did I do something wrong? Did I not explain something well enough for you? And he said, no. I just really like these people. I like the congregation. And I said, well, that's all that matters. He's, they're in their 30s, and you need that I belong club. And, and I have nothing against Christianity. I was just like curious in terms of Christian values versus Buddhist values. And, but before I had the operation, I had a weak moment, and I was like, is this it? Is this it? I mean, we're dead longer than we are alive. And I said, was that it? That I just passed my life here, and what's going to happen? And my son, who converted to Presbyterian, turned to me, he goes, Pa, you're a Buddhist. Get a hold of yourself. You know what's going to happen next. And I just was so grateful for that weak moment, because I never would have heard that from him. You know what I mean? It was just amazing. So, yes, Jayne, we work on values every day.
So I want to ask you one last thing that I ask all my guests, and if you can think about it for a minute and dig deep. What is the one thing that no one would ever know about you unless you told them?
Wow. A deep dive, huh?
Yeah.
Interesting. For my first thing off the top of the bat, I'm the national U.S. square dancing champion, and I achieved it in Detroit. I don't tell anybody that.
No way.
Yes, yes, yes. And I was a
That's
clogger, to
great.
be specific. And clogging is the opposite of tapping. Tap, you bounce off the floor. Clogger, you bounce into the floor. But nobody knows that.
Amazing.
And I would say, because I'm hearing impaired, it's pretty much corrected for these $10,000 hearing aids. But one of the things that people don't know about hearing is that hearing and understanding go hand in hand. And the way that you can identify hearing a student is their small vocabulary. And what happens is hearing people get embarrassed about mispronouncing a word in front of people. So they just keep their vocabulary very small and tight, and they use the same words over and over. And I remember thinking, right, once I learned that, because in the dictionary, now today with digital, you can hit the speaker and it'll tell you how the word's pronounced, right?
Yes.
So I
Yes, they
used to
will.
be
Yep. Mhm.
very insecure about pronouncing words, and deep down inside, Jane, you say that down. Deep down inside, I am an incredibly shy person, but I overcompensate by talking too much. I don't know if that makes
Ah,
sense, but
yes, it does. It does.
I'm
Mhm.
deep. I'm in the middle child of this big Irish Catholic family, and there was no time. I mean, Irish Catholic, over dramatic people. There wasn't a window to talk. You know what I mean? I just sat and I watched. And I was that way. And then when I got to high school, I started saying, "Hey, I'm tired," and I learned the skill of. But the thing is, like you just said, to bring it full circle, people when they get to know me say, "I don't know anything about you."
Hmm.
It's because I've been talking. I've been talking the whole time to avoid that. If I entertain you, if I thrill you or get you, then you're not going to focus on me, and you're going to. And my brother completed his life last year, and some of my friends were like, "You had a brother in Denver?" And it's one of the things about the Irish culture is that we never talk about what happens under the roof,
Right.
ever,
Right.
ever. That never leaves the home. And so through college, and I have friends now, reconnected with them, and they're like, "I don't know anything. Your mother died? You have 6 siblings?" They're like, "I don't know anything about you." And I was like, so when you ask that question, was there something that people don't know about me? A
A
lot.
lot. There's a lot that they don't know. They'll know a little more when they hear this, perhaps, but
Yeah, this
yeah.
is so liberating. You have no idea.
Oh.
As a gay man, I can say politically correct. I feel like I'm taking my bra off. It's really liberating.
Wow. Well, I'm honored that you feel that way.
Oh, your questions and your intuitiveness. I'm just like, oh, thank God. I don't have to guide the conversation anywhere.
Thank you, Gavin. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. This has been extremely enlightening, very informative, and also very moving. I'm I'm touched by what you do, and I hope people hear this and are inspired to do something like what you've done, even a small part of it.
I and I didn't mean to be in any way negative Nancy, but by raising the awareness of this, for lack of a better word, corruption in foster care, we can attract, different parents. We can make it a meaningful experience, and we could, we've made so many changes, and my son's housing got kicked back from San Francisco State, and I wrote to Robert Corrigan, the president of San Francisco State. I said, I don't understand. These children are the wards of the state. You are a state university. You are directly responsible. You should be providing housing for foster care, and maybe more than 4% would show up. Boom. He got his housing.
Yeah.
And now there's a foster care omnibus. It's correct to say, they're embarrassed about pronouncing a word, omnibus, at
Ombudsman.
San Francisco.
Yeah,
Oh,
ombudsman.
ombudsman, right.
Mhm.
And at San Francisco State. But I'm saying, I'm not looking for credit, but I'm just saying to speak up. Just like you were saying, if you make things aware, how can we improve on something we don't know what's going wrong? And that's what I'm really advocating foster care. I advocate forever home. And it is such a meaningful experience when when you see them achieving what they need to achieve. And funny thing is, when you're in the teacher's lounge, nobody wants your whole story. How are your kids? They all have jobs and benefits. Good. How about you? That's all they want to know. Are they gainfully employed, and do they have health benefits? That's all they need to know.
Well, good on you, Gavin. Really good on you. And thank you again. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Gavin, for sharing your story with us. It's really wonderful what you've done, quitting your job to raise 5 kids as a single dad or pa, and making sure they all got through college. You've given them a great start. I'm also intrigued about your investigation following the nickel, as in the $35 million that a nonprofit is just simply sitting on. I think that warrants some more digging into, because how many institutions are out there that are receiving money that is earmarked for these kids, and the kids never see it? Now, this is something Jayne and I have been talking about exploring more deeply in more episodes, and we will. So thank you for taking the time to be here today and inspiring us to look more deeply into things that affect these kids and could potentially be fixed. So join us next week for another wonderful guest. Thank you for listening, and be well. If you or someone you know is harming themselves or thinking about harming themselves, go to crisistextline.org. If you see something, say something. If you suspect a child's health or safety is jeopardized in any way by parents or anyone else, contact the Child Protective Services Agency in your county. 24-hour hotlines are staffed by trained social workers who will help you through the process, and you can do so anonymously. In California, you can call the Child Protection Hotline at 800-540-4000. So if you see something, say something. You might be saving a child's life. If you want to know more about becoming a CASA anywhere in the country, go to nationalcasagal.org, and in LA, casala.org. And if you want to know more about becoming a foster parent, check out the National Foster Parent Association at nfponline.org. There's also faithfosterfamilies.org and adoptuskids.org. There's tons of other information online as well, so you can just hunt around. We also want to thank the supremely talented Christina Apostolopoulos for her beautiful original music. You can find her music on Spotify or Instagram at Christina Aposto. And also thank you to Yukon Har for his engineering. Thanks for listening, and if you like what you hear and you find it as valuable as we do, please rate us and hit subscribe. You can also make a donation at bonusbabies.org. See you next time.